All right, attention. Captain to crew. All hands square away to decelerate. Ship's beeper will, as usual, sound 10 times after lights dim. Come on, Doc. DC, bosun.
Aye, aye, sir. DC stations. On the double.
In 1956, a science fiction film arrived that changed everything. Forbidden Planet did not just entertain audiences. It reshaped what the genre could be, what it could say, and how far a studio was willing to go to bring an otherworldly vision to life. With its sprawling sets, groundbreaking sound design, and a plot drawn from the works of William Shakespeare, this film stood apart from every B-movie creature feature of its era. Decades later, its fingerprints can be found across nearly every corner of science fiction cinema and television. These are 20 facts about Forbidden Planet that most people never knew. 20. The film was originally set on Mercury and had a completely different title. Before Forbidden Planet became the film audiences know today, it went through a dramatic transformation on the page. The original screenplay, written in 1952 by Irving Bloch and Alan Adler, carried the title Fatal Planet. That alone signals how different the project was in its earliest form. The story took place in the year 1976 on the planet Mercury, rather than the distant star system of Altair. An Earth expedition led by a man named John Grant was sent to retrieve a scientist named Dr. Adams and his daughter Dorianne, who had been stranded on Mercury for 2 decades. Hume's first story outline arrived in November 1952, and it fundamentally rebuilt the concept. He relocated the action to a planet orbiting a distant star, introduced the Krell as a vanished civilization of incomprehensible advancement, and planted the central Freudian idea of a monster created by the unconscious mind. What began as a fairly conventional rescue mission story became something far more ambitious. The shift from Mercury to Altair 4, and from Fatal Planet to Forbidden Planet, reflected a complete reimagining of what this film could be. 19. It was a loose adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest set in outer space. One of the most unusual decisions behind Forbidden Planet was the choice to build a science fiction blockbuster on the framework of a 400-year-old play. Cyril Hume's screenplay drew heavily from William Shakespeare's The Tempest, recasting its central figures in a galactic setting with almost surgical precision. Dr. Edward Morbius, played by Walter Pidgeon, served as the equivalent of Prospero, the powerful sorcerer of Shakespeare's play who controls a remote island through knowledge and supernatural force. The invisible id monster served as a reimagining of Caliban, the monstrous and primal figure in The Tempest, who represents the darker, uncontrolled side of human nature. In the film, the monster is not a separate creature at all, but a projection of Morbius's own subconscious desires and jealousies, given physical form by the vast mental amplification machines left behind by the Krell. Critics and scholars have long noted this parallel, and the Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus for the film reads that Shakespeare receives the deluxe space treatment in an adaptation of The Tempest, with impressive sets and seamless special effects. 18. The world premiere took place at a science fiction convention, not a Hollywood theater. Most major Hollywood productions of the 1950s held their world premieres at glamorous cinemas in New York or Los Angeles, surrounded by studio fanfare and celebrity appearances. Forbidden Planet took a different path. The film had its world premiere at the Southeastern Science Fiction Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, on March 3rd and 4th, 1956. This was a deliberate decision, placing the film directly in front of the audience, most likely to appreciate its ambitions. Science fiction conventions in the 1950s were small but passionate gatherings of dedicated readers and enthusiasts who followed the pulp magazines, short stories, and novels that defined the genre at the time. Choosing such a venue for the premiere sent a signal that MGM understood what kind of film Forbidden Planet was. This was not a creature feature designed to shock teenagers. It was a thoughtful, expensive production aimed at audiences who took science fiction seriously as literature. 17. The Green Sky of Altair. The fourth was a scientifically informed decision. When audiences watch Forbidden Planet today, one of the first things that strikes the eye is the strange, vivid green color of the sky over Altair IV. This was not simply an artistic choice made for visual effect or to signal that the crew had landed somewhere alien. Director Fred M. Wilcox actually consulted with scientists before making this decision, and the green sky was the result of that scientific research rather than simple imagination. Altair is a real star, located approximately 17 light-years from Earth in the constellation Aquila. It is a white to blue-white star, hotter and more luminous than the Sun. The reasoning behind the green sky involved how a planet orbiting a star with different spectral characteristics from our own would receive and scatter light differently than Earth does. The blue sky of Earth results from the way sunlight interacts with our specific atmosphere, and a different stellar environment would produce a different atmospheric appearance. It is one of the small details that separates Forbidden Planet from the monster movies it was produced alongside. 16. The special effects animation was provided on loan from Walt Disney. By 1956, MGM had largely dismantled its full animation department, leaving the studio without the in-house talent needed to handle the ambitious visual effects that Forbidden Planet required. The solution came from an unexpected source. MGM arranged for veteran animator Joshua Meador to be loaned to them directly from Walt Disney Productions, where he had worked on films including Alice in Wonderland. 15. Robbie the Robot. Cost $125,000 to build, representing nearly 7% of the entire film budget. Even within the context of a relatively expensive production, the construction of Robbie the Robot represented a staggering financial commitment. The prop cost approximately $125,000 to design and build, which at the time accounted for nearly 7% of the film's total budget of $1.9 million. In 2017 dollars, that figure equates to at least $1 million spent on a single piece of production equipment. Robbie was designed by members of the MGM art department and constructed by the studio's prop department. The design process began with initial sketches from production designer Arnold Gillespie, art director Arthur Lonergan, and writer Irving Bloch. These concepts were then refined by production illustrator Mentor Hubner and finalized by MGM staff mechanical designer Robert Kinoshita. The finished robot was constructed from a wide range of materials, including metal, plastic, rubber, glass, and plexiglass, with internal lighting elements and electronic components that had to be specially fabricated. 14. The film's musical score was entirely electronic. Forbidden Planet holds a remarkable place in the history of music as well as cinema. Its entire musical score was composed using electronic means, making it the first film of any genre to use a completely electronic soundtrack. This was not simply unusual for a Hollywood production of the 1950s, it was without precedent. The musicians responsible for this achievement were husband and wife team Bebe and Louis Barron, who worked outside the mainstream music industry from a studio in New York. The Barrons did not use conventional musical instruments of any kind. Instead, they built custom electronic circuits that they recorded and manipulated to produce the sounds heard throughout the film. Each circuit was designed to behave in a specific way, with the electronic components eventually reaching a point of overload and destruction, a process the Barrons deliberately incorporated into their compositional method. The resulting sounds were entirely unlike anything audiences had heard before. 13. A Hollywood composer was hired and fired before the Barrons were discovered at a beatnik nightclub. The electronic score that made Forbidden Planet famous was not the original plan. MGM had already hired a conventional Hollywood composer named David Rose to write the film's music. Rose was a respected figure in the industry, known for his light orchestral work, including the widely recognized piece Holiday for Strings. He began work on the score in 1955 with every expectation of delivering a traditional film soundtrack. Everything changed during the Christmas season of 1955 when MGM production chief Dor Sherry was on a family holiday in New York City. While visiting a beatnik nightclub in Greenwich Village, Shari encountered Bibi and Louis Barron performing their experimental electronic music. The experience apparently made a strong impression. Shari returned to Los Angeles and, sometime between Christmas 1955 and New Year's Day, 1956, discharged David Rose from the project and replaced him with the Barrons. Rose was understandably disappointed, having already composed a main title theme for the film. He later recorded this discarded theme as a 7-inch single and released it on MGM Records in 1956, which remains the only confirmed surviving piece from his original score. 12. The film's iconic poster depicts a scene that never actually occurs in the movie. The promotional poster for Forbidden Planet is one of the most recognizable images in science fiction cinema history. It shows a towering, menacing robot carrying a struggling young woman in its arms. The imagery echoing the monster carries helpless heroine convention that had been a staple of pulp science fiction and horror movie advertising since the 1930s. The image is dramatic, arresting, and entirely fabricated, because no such scene occurs anywhere in the actual film. The robot shown carrying Anne Francis in the poster is clearly meant to represent Robbie the robot, the film's beloved mechanical supporting character. But within the story, Robbie is a gentle, helpful, and highly sophisticated creation who serves Dr. Morbius and later cheerfully assists the crew of the C-57D. He carries groceries. He synthesizes bourbon. He transports crew members in his electrically controlled vehicle. What he emphatically does not do is threaten or menace any of the human characters. In fact, Robbie's core programming explicitly prevents him from harming humans. A pivotal moment in the film occurs when Morbius commands Robbie to kill the approaching id monster. Because the monster is essentially a manifestation of Morbius himself, a human consciousness, Robbie's safety protocols cause him to shut down rather than comply. The robot cannot kill a person under any circumstances, which makes the threatening imagery of the official poster a deliberate and knowing deception on MGM's part, borrowing a visual language audiences recognized while selling a film that subverted those very conventions. 11. MGM borrowed a competing studio's film to research how to make Forbidden Planet. Before production began on Forbidden Planet, MGM took the unusual step of borrowing a print of This Island Earth, a 1955 science fiction film produced by Universal International, to study it as a reference point for their own production. This practice of studios formally borrowing films from one another for research purposes was not unheard of, but the specific nature of what MGM was seeking to learn reveals something about the competitive landscape of 1950s science fiction cinema. This Island Earth had been notable for its ambitious production design and relatively generous budget by the standards of the genre. MGM's decision to study it before launching into Forbidden Planet suggests that the production team wanted to understand where the current benchmark for expensive science fiction stood before attempting to surpass it. The result was a film that made This Island Earth look modest by comparison, with sets, effects, and a scope that placed Forbidden Planet in a category of its own. MGM's total budget for Forbidden Planet was approximately $1.9 million, which placed it well above the typical science fiction production of the era, but still modest compared to the historical epics the major studios were funding at the time. 10. The film was the first science fiction movie to depict humans traveling faster than light in a human-built ship. Forbidden Planet holds a specific and significant place in the history of science fiction cinema as the first film to show human beings traveling faster than light in a spacecraft they had designed and built themselves. This distinction may seem technical, but it carried real weight in the context of the genre's development. Prior to Forbidden Planet, most science fiction films that involved interstellar travel relied on alien technology, unexplained mechanisms, or simply glossed over the physics of space travel entirely. The opening narration of the film explicitly addresses the history of space travel in its fictional universe, describing how humanity reached the moon in the final decade of the 21st century and the other planets of the solar system by 2200. The discovery of hyperdrive, through which the speed of light was first attained and then surpassed, followed thereafter, enabling the colonization of deep space. This backstory situated the C-57D and its crew within a coherent science-fictional history rather than simply dropping them into an interstellar adventure without explanation. The film was also the first science fiction film to be set entirely on a planet orbiting another star, far from Earth and the solar system. Previous science fiction films had ventured to the Moon, to Mars, to Venus, and occasionally to fictional planets within familiar reach, but none had placed their action exclusively in deep space around a real distant star by Altair. These two firsts together positioned Forbidden Planet as the origin point of a particular kind of science fiction storytelling, the kind that would define the genre for the next half-century. 9. Leslie Nielsen called the Star Trek production office to personally complement the show. The connections between Forbidden Planet and the original Star Trek television series have been analyzed and debated by fans and historians for decades. Gene Roddenberry publicly denied that Forbidden Planet was a primary influence on Star Trek, but internal documents from the period tell a different story. In a 1964 letter later published in an authorized biography, Roddenberry advised a production colleague to take another very hard look at the spaceship in Forbidden Planet, its configurations, controls, and instrumentation, for reference during Star Trek's development. The parallels between the two productions are extensive. Both feature a commander leading a crew on a faster-than-light starship to investigate a distant world. The relationship between Commander Adams and Dr. Ostro in Forbidden Planet closely mirrors the dynamic between Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy in Star Trek. The tendency in both productions to explain strange phenomena scientifically rather than fantastically, and to ground interstellar adventure in contemporary naval terminology, reflects a shared sensibility. Leslie Nielsen himself was moved to reach out when Star Trek first appeared on television in 1966. Star Trek writer D.C. Fontana, who was working as a production secretary at the time, later recounted the story. Early one morning, the phone rang at the Star Trek production office while Roddenberry was not yet in. Fontana answered, and the caller identified himself as Leslie Nielsen, calling to compliment the show and express how much he admired what the production team had achieved. The connection between the man who played Commander Adams and the show he had helped inspire was not lost on anyone involved. 8. A surviving work print of the film was discovered in 1977. It was standard industry practice in the 1950s for studios to destroy work prints of their films once a production had been completed and released. A work print is an early assembled version of the film used during editing and post-production, and it typically contains scenes, dialogue, and sequences that differ from the final theatrical cut. The destruction of these prints was routine, driven by cost considerations and the assumption that the finished film was the only version worth preserving. In the case of Forbidden Planet, the work print was not destroyed. It survived unnoticed for more than 2 decades until its discovery in 1977, a full 21 years after the film's original release. When researchers examined the recovered work print, they found that it differed from the release version in meaningful ways. Differences appear in characterization, in dialogue, and in specific scenes that were altered or removed before the film reached theaters. 7. Robert Kinoshita, who built Robbie the Robot, later became art director for Lost in Space. The man credited with building Robbie the Robot, Japanese-American designer Robert Kinoshita, went on to shape the visual language of science fiction television in a way that made the influence of Forbidden Planet inescapable for a generation of television viewers. After his work on the film, Kinoshita became the art director for Lost in Space, the television series that debuted in 1966 and ran for 3 seasons. His involvement meant that the aesthetic of Forbidden Planet was directly transferred into one of the decade's most popular science fiction shows. The parallels between Robbie the Robot and the robot from Lost in Space are striking and deliberate. Both have a distinctive glass dome head with animated internal elements. Both feature rotating antenna-style earpieces. Both have a flashing light mouth mechanism and a chest panel filled with animated components. These similarities are not coincidental. They reflect the direct involvement of the same designer carrying his creative vision from one project to the next. 6. The id monster bears a subtle visual resemblance to MGM's own lion mascot. Hidden within the film's most terrifying sequences is a visual joke that works simultaneously as a studio in-joke and a genuinely clever piece of thematic design. The id monster, the invisible force that tears apart the crew of the Bellerophon and later attacks the C-57D, becomes partially visible during the film's climax when the crew fires their high-energy blasters at it. In these moments, the crackling energy beams illuminate the creature's outline and reveal its form. According to a behind-the-scenes featurette on the film's DVD release, a careful examination of the monster during these lit sequences reveals that it possesses the visual characteristics of a large, roaring feline. The bellowing creature caught in the blaster beams is a direct reference to and visual pun on MGM's iconic mascot, Leo the Lion, whose roar introduces every MGM production at the beginning of the film. The studio's own roaring symbol of power had been transformed into the monstrous unleashed id of a scholar driven mad by knowledge. 5. Theaters gave audiences special glasses to see the invisible monster. In a promotional gimmick that prefigured the 3D glasses, smell-o-vision, and audience participation stunts that would become associated with showmen like William Castle later in the decade, theaters screening Forbidden Planet distributed special paper glasses with red lenses to audiences during certain performances. These glasses were designed to serve a specific narrative purpose within the experience of watching the film. The glasses were to be worn during scenes featuring the invisible monster. Audiences were alerted when to put them on by specific flashes or cues on screen. When the glasses were in place, the invisible creature was apparently revealed, with the colored lens filtering making a hidden element of the image visible in a way that was not apparent to the naked eye. This technique turned the act of watching the film into a participatory event, giving audiences a physical role in the experience of the story. The use of such promotional devices reflected the broader challenge that cinema faced in the 1950s as it competed with the growing popularity of television. Studios and exhibitors were searching for experiences that could not be replicated at home, and gimmicks like the Forbidden Planet glasses, however modest, were part of that larger effort to make cinema an event rather than simply a film. The glasses also underscored one of the production's central conceits, that the monster's invisibility was not a limitation, but a source of genuine and sustained dread. 4. The film established a new standard for science fiction budgets and changed what the genre could achieve. Before Forbidden Planet, science fiction films were almost universally considered low-priority productions by Hollywood studio executives. The genre was associated with cheap sets, implausible costumes, and minimal budgets. Studios rarely invested meaningful resources in science fiction, treating it as disposable entertainment for undiscriminating audiences rather than as a category capable of producing prestigious, commercially significant work. Forbidden Planet changed this calculation. Film historian Ben Mankiewicz has argued that the film's success made future big-budget science fiction films possible, not just by demonstrating that audiences would accept an expensive and serious science fiction production, but by proving that such a production could make money. The reaction from the preview audience was so strongly positive that the film was released without any further changes. The film opened to positive reviews and solid box office returns, justifying MGM's investment. The legacy of this shift is difficult to overstate. The path from Forbidden Planet leads directly to 2001, A Space Odyssey in 1968, to Star Wars in 1977. to the entire landscape of expensive, ambitious science fiction that defined the following decades of Hollywood filmmaking. Each of those productions owed something to the demonstration that Forbidden Planet provided, that science fiction, properly funded and seriously executed, could reach the widest possible audience. The film currently holds a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 52 critical reviews, reflecting how thoroughly its reputation has endured. 3. The film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Special Effects. Forbidden Planet received an Academy Award nomination for Best Special Effects at the 29th Academy Awards, a recognition that placed it in formal competition for one of the most technically prestigious honors in Hollywood. The nomination acknowledged the film's visual achievements, which included not only the animated sequences created by Joshua Meador on loan from Disney, but also the massive practical sets, the various weapon and energy effects, and the overall visual coherence of an alien world built entirely on an MGM soundstage. The sets for the film were constructed at MGM's facilities at their Culver City studio lot, designed by Cedric Gibbons, a legend of Hollywood production design, and art director Arthur Lonergan. Gibbons was one of the most decorated designers in the history of the Academy Awards, having won the Oscar for Best Art Direction 11 times and having played a role in designing the Oscar statuette itself. His involvement gave the film a visual authority and ambition that went beyond what most science fiction productions could claim. The underground Krell machinery sequences in particular required the construction of sets of extraordinary scale, designed to suggest a civilization of incomprehensible advancement. Enormous turbines, vast corridors, and mechanisms of alien purpose filled the frame in ways that genuinely conveyed the sense of a technology that had transcended anything human experience could contain. The Academy nomination confirmed what audiences already sensed, that what they were seeing on screen represented something new in the visual vocabulary of cinema. 2. Robbie the Robot became the most expensive film prop ever sold at auction, fetching over $5 million. The story of Robbie the Robot did not end when Forbidden Planet completed its theatrical run. The prop went on to what can only be described as a working career in Hollywood, appearing in dozens of films, television series, and commercials over the following decades. After his debut in Forbidden Planet, Robbie starred in MGM's science fiction follow-up The Invisible Boy in 1957. He then appeared in episodes of The Gale Storm Show, The Thin Man, Columbo, The Addams Family, and Lost in Space, where he appeared alongside the series' own robot. The original Robbie the Robot suit was sold by MGM in 1971 and purchased by Jim Brooker for display at his Movie World attraction near Disneyland in Buena Park, California. While on display, the prop suffered considerable damage from visitors, and it had deteriorated significantly by the time the museum closed in 1980. Director William Malone then purchased the robot along with its transport vehicle, original MGM spare parts, and shipping containers, and undertook a careful restoration to return it to its original 1956 condition. In November 2017, Bonham's auctioneers held a sale in New York at which the complete original Robbie the Robot suit, along with his control panel, his Jeep from Forbidden Planet, and the robot's spare parts, went under the hammer. The bidding was fierce, driven by the prop's status as a robot pioneer and its remarkable rarity as a fully functional original piece from one of cinema's most influential films. The final sale price reached $5,375,000, breaking records and making Robbie the Robot the most expensive film prop ever sold at public auction at that time. 1. The film planted the seeds for both Star Trek and Star Wars, and its influence is woven into nearly all of modern science fiction. When film historians attempt to trace the genealogy of modern science fiction cinema, the line almost always runs back to Forbidden Planet. The film arrived at a specific moment and made a specific argument. That science fiction was not a genre for cheap thrills and rubber-suited monsters, but a medium capable of engaging with philosophy, psychology, literature, and the deepest questions about human nature. That argument, once made convincingly, changed everything. The connections to Star Trek are documented, even if Gene Roddenberry preferred to minimize them publicly. Internal documents from the development of Star Trek show that Roddenberry advised his team to study the spaceship of Forbidden Planet closely during the design of the Enterprise. The casting memos for early Star Trek pilots considered Leslie Nielsen, Anne Francis, and Warren Stevens, all Forbidden Planet alumni, for major roles. The overall conception of a military-style crew exploring the unknown in a faster-than-light ship, using scientific explanation rather than magic to account for what they encounter, is a direct inheritance from the 1956 film. The influence on Star Wars was acknowledged more openly by George Lucas, who cited the film as part of the science fiction inheritance he was drawing on when building his own galaxy. The robot design tradition that runs from Robbie to Lost in Space's Robot to R2-D2 and C-3PO is a direct lineage. The notion of a universe populated by ancient civilizations whose ruins hold terrible secrets, from the Krell to the Sith to the precursors of countless other science fiction stories, traces its cinematic origin to the underground machinery of Altair 4. Pauline Kael called it the best of the science fiction interstellar productions of the 1950s. Film historian Lee Pfeiffer described it as much beloved by science fiction fans, and in 2013, the Library of Congress agreed, preserving it permanently as a film of cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. No single assessment captures it fully. Forbidden Planet is simply the point at which science fiction cinema grew up. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.